and welcome back. This is Fuzzee Tutorials and my name is Dave. Today I'm introducing you to Graphic by Picta for Mac. This used to be called iDraw. We're going to show you the interface and how to do the basics and move around in the app. This is a powerful yet easy program. It has many features usually found in apps like CorelDRAW, Adobe Illustrator, Photoshop, or the GIMP. Only this is far less expensive and a much smaller learning curve. It is also available for iPad, and I'm thinking about making a tutorial for that soon. If it's something that you'd like to see, drop a comment below. If you find our content useful, hit that like button. If you want to see more Fuzzee tutorials, please hit subscribe. And if you want to know when new tutorials come out, please click that notification bell. Alright, let's get into it right now. Okay, here we go. So first we're going to open Graphic. Because there's nothing open in it right now, it wants a new document, or you can go down here and open an existing file. We're going to start with a blank document for the purposes of this tutorial, and I've already set a size in here. That's a standard definition video size. Alright. So now let's introduce you to the interface. So the first thing you'll notice up at the top here is we have a few little tidbits of information that we can use as we're working on stuff. I'll show you a little bit more about that later. Now on the left hand side we've got our main tool panel. Now I'm not going to go through all the tools because this is just a beginning tutorial. And down here is our foreground color and this is our background color. Now over on the right here we currently have turned on our appearance inspector. Now any of these tools you can turn the panel off or back on, and you'll find yourself doing that a lot just to make room to work in. And this is our properties alignment, or sorry, our properties tool panel, and this has a few settings of its own, just like the other one. Shape library. These are some shapes that I've made myself, added to my library. And they also come with a few. Nice little selection of some pre-made things to work with. And this is our layers tool. Layers we're definitely going to be covering. That's a very necessary part of working in this program, and it's a very powerful tool. Now this is the appearance tool panel. This is the one that you're going to probably use the most. But first I'm going to introduce you to some basic things in our properties here. Now the first thing that you're going to need to work with here is actual canvas settings. Now in here we can go in and actually adjust the size of our canvas if we need to, and the orientation, so we can change it from portrait to landscape. And you can change from pixels through inches, centimeters, millimeters. Now the other ones come in handy if you're actually doing publishing layout with this, which this program works very well for. It's another thing it's got in common with CorelDRAW. And you can also set your scale. Now here we can change our background color to whatever it is you like to work with. Now I always just leave it a standard white. Now since we've got this color panel up, I want to show you a couple of things. Now you've actually got a choice of different types of panels, and you can go to a standard color picker. And this is one little quirk of this program that I wish they'd fix. Once you select a new tool, you have to go back into it to have it show up. Now I'm kind of an old school graphics artist. I've been using graphics programs for about 30 years, so I'm very used to working with the RGB sliders. Well, that's the one that I'll be showing you today mostly. Now the reason I'm not going to be setting background colors because I use another method to set my colors in the background, and I'll show you why that is in a little bit. Now the other thing we can do here is we can actually have no background at all, which sometimes I'll do if I'm going to be overlaying this graphic onto something else in another program. And you can choose gradients, or you can even choose an image to use as your background. But we're not going to do that just now. I'm actually going to set it to transparent. So when you've got these little light and dark squares in the background, that's telling you that it's actually transparent. Now the next thing you need to know about is working with the grid. Now we can show the grid, and then we can make setting changes. And actually I'm going to go back and change the background color to white. Makes it easier to see the grid. Okay. So now here you can set how many pixels you want each line to show up, each main line. That's these thicker, darker ones here, both horizontally and vertically. And then you can set how many lines you want in between the bigger lines. And you can set your margins top, bottom, left, and right. And you can got a couple more options down here, and these aren't options I actually use. Now one feature when you're first getting to know the program you're probably going to want to use, and that's snap to grid. Now that really helps you organize things and keep stuff lined up, and I'll show you how that works in a little bit when I'm done showing you the interface. And this is where we would work with paths, but that's beyond the scope of this tutorial. Now here's something that you're going to use a lot. It's got some alignment tools as well as some spacing tools. And these buttons right here, this is for flipping your image horizontally, and this is for flipping it vertically. Now when you have a group of objects that you always want to select together, you can select those objects and then group them. And later on, if you need to work with one individually, you can ungroup them. And here we can take objects and place them one in front of the other, or on top of each other I should say. So you can bring it all the way to the front, or you can bring it forward one step at a time. You can send it backward one step at a time, or you can send it all the way to the back. Now I tend to use a combination of this and the ordering of my layers to control what stuff gets put in front of what. And this is our positioning tool here, or our positioning panel. Now something that I wanted to show you here, off to the right you see this little space here. If you click that, you get a little chain link shows up, and what that does is it locks the sizing together so that if you adjust one, it forces the other to stay in proportion to it. And then we have our shear tools horizontally and vertically, and a rotation tool. Okay, a little bit more detail with our shape tool. We've got a few other nice little things in here. Now you can add to these, but that's a little bit of a process if you want to add external libraries, and then we'll get into that in another tutorial. And I'll just show you some of the other stuff they have to offer here. This is stuff that all comes built in. Alright, there's a few things that you are going to want to learn by way of keyboard shortcuts, because they're going to save you a lot of time. Now I will show you how to do them on the menu, and one thing you'll notice on the menu is that you have off to the right these are actually the keyboard shortcuts that will activate these options. Now I'm going to assume that you already know what these little symbols mean. If not, you can watch one of my other tutorials where I'll be covering the basics of working on a Mac. And here we have our edit menu. And just a quick look through the other menus. Alright, so let's get started doing stuff. So why don't we start with, let's draw a box. So we pick our box tool and we want to pick a color. And so let's pick something like a nice green color. Now the nice thing about this is if you want to set another color that you're going to commonly use, let's say a red, and you can have that set as your background, and then you can go right in here and if you click it'll switch them back and forth. So it's just a quick little tool. So now we're going to go here and we're going to draw a box. Now the nice thing about having snap to grid turned on is I only have to get close to my grid and it'll automatically draw right on it, and it'll take you to the next grid as soon as you get close. Now once you're doing some really fine detailed work, you're probably going to want to turn that feature off because sometimes you want to go halfway in between something. So now this is where we can start using some of these other features. And I'm just going to go over here, swap my colors, and oh, my apologies. Let's draw another box. And we'll swap the color on that. Alright. So now I'm going to show you a couple of things that we can play with here by way of properties. And now a stroke has already been set for this, but it's been set to 0. So if we want to have a stroke, all we got to do is turn it on, and you can see it growing on the screen as I adjust this number. Now you've got some options for your stroke. You can have it centered on the outline, or you can have it all to the inside, or you can have it all on the outside. And that comes in handy, being able to change how that's happening depending on the circumstances. Now for the most part I tend to use it on the outside, so that's where I'm going to leave it. And then if we want to add a drop shadow, we can do that. And if you just click on the word of these items, you can get into the individual settings for that. So just to make it more obvious so you can really see it. And then we can, when we change the size of it, if you notice it does expand it, but it's also making it blurrier. Now when you're doing graphics professionally, you need to use a light touch on these things. If you overdo them, then it just doesn't look good. And you can also, if you want to, you can come in and change the color of your shadow. There are times when you're going to want to do that. Let's say we want to make it a purple color. And the other thing you can change is the alpha or transparency level. So this basically changes the intensity, but of course when you change the transparency, if there's something in behind it that has detail, that'll allow some of that detail to show through. So we're just going to go back and change that back to black. There are a few other options here, but I'm just showing you the basics today. Now, the one little cool trick that I feel I really need to show you is in fill. So we can do some really neat things here. Now we can switch to, say, a linear gradient, and then we can pick some colors. So let's say we want to go from kind of a nice light blue, and we want that to go to a dark blue. Now you can also come in here and you can add a couple in the middle so that you can kind of change the character of how the fade happens, where it happens. So this is a pretty powerful tool. You can do some really interesting stuff with this. And we have radial gradients. Now they've got a separate one for angle gradient, but you can accomplish the same thing with linear gradient. If you go in here and set your angle, you can get some really neat effects with that. And you can also apply a repeating pattern. And if we go in here, we can choose some different patterns. This is a pattern that I made myself. And making patterns to reuse like that is something I'll show you guys in another tutorial. But probably one of the most commonly used things other than color is putting an image in as your fill. And it's so much easier to do it in this program than most. Most you have to create a mask and then bring in another picture and apply the mask to it and copy and paste. But it's far easier to do in this one. So I'm going to pick something here. And then we can just resize it to fit the actual picture. Now this is an instance where we're going to want to turn off our snap to grid for a little bit. So we'll just go in here and we'll turn that off so we can get this size just right. Now there's a little more advanced feature that goes along with this that I want to show you, because it's something you could wind up using a lot, especially if you want to start doing collages or if you want to do some other fancy little tricks. First thing we want to do is actually copy this. So we're going to right click on it and we're going to copy. Now I'm going to go over here and I'm going to make another layer. Now I'll show you a couple things on the layers here. If you look to these little eyes here, if I want to make a layer disappear, all I have to do is turn off the eye. And we can also name our layers, and if you're going to be using a lot of them, this is something you are going to want to start doing. All I did there was double click on the layer name, and we'll call this background. Okay, and just for something to call it, I'll just name it collage. Okay, now I'm going to actually turn that background layer off now. And now I'm going to show you a really neat trick where we can take and draw a circle or an ellipse. And something else I want to show you too here, if we bring this out, you know, we can make any shape of an ellipse that we want, and then we can rotate it later into some very fine adjustments on angles. But if you want to make sure you're getting a perfect circle and you don't want to have to go turn the grid on, if you just hold your shift key down, then it'll force it into being a circle. Now, if you use that shift drag trick, it'll do the same for rectangles. And if you use it when you're drawing a line, it'll constrain that line to staying in the same direction for the entire line. So if I was to go over here and I start drawing a line, but I want it to be perfectly straight, and if I hold that shift key down, then it forces it to be straight. And you can do that with vertical as well. Very handy little tool. Now we'll go back to our picker tool, and we'll delete that and click on that one, delete it. Okay, now we're going to go to our circle tool, and you remember when we copied those flames, we can go in here and we can go paste inside, and whatever you've got selected, it'll paste it inside that. And now while I've still got, well, it's still showing the selection of the original graphic, I can use the arrow keys and I can move it down. Now you notice it's just shifting a little tiny bit. If I hold the shift key down and hit shift, then it moves it much larger increments. Now we can even grab a corner and hold the shift key down. We'll also force it to stay proportional, so we won't have to actually go over and click on that link tool I was showing you. And there we go. So that is a handy little trick right there, and it's something you're going to find yourself using a lot of. And I'll show you another instance where you're going to use that a lot. Now you'll notice I clicked out in an empty area and it deselected that original background image that we had copied. Once that's been done, once you go back and select this, now it's independent of the background image and you can move it wherever you want. And you can resize it to whatever you want. But if you change the proportions of it, you can have that happen. Now if you want to reverse something you just did, you can either go up to the menu to edit and go undo, or you can use Command Z. Now if I hold my shift key down, I'll make sure to keep it proportional. Okay, so I'm going to make another layer here. Now I'm going to show you the same trick you can do with text, but it's not quite as simple as it looks. There's a couple of steps to it. Now that's a nice big font, but since we're playing with text, let's show you some of the things here. If we go over to our panel, you see a letter here for text. Once we select that, then we can go in and we can change fonts. So we can select a different font. You'll find as you do this that you're gonna get a personal group of fonts that you like to use for things. And looks like it made it a little too big to fit in the box. Okay, now before we are going to do this trick, we're going to need to convert our text to outlines. And a little quirk is once you deselect and go back to select, they're now each individual graphics. Now if you want to select a grouping of things, you can just drag a box around it and it'll select them all. And if you go to your properties grid or your properties tool panel, and we can go over here and you could group them so that selecting one is select them all. But for this little trick, there's actually a kind of a quirk in this app that if you try and apply it all at once, it doesn't work out quite the way you think it will. So we're going to do this individually. Okay, so we can do the same with this text now that we've converted it to shapes or curves as we did with that square on the other layer. We can select it and we can go into our color fill and we can grab an image. Okay, so you notice here that it hasn't quite filled the letter. So what we need to do is go over here to where it says scale to fit, and we're going to change that to stretch to fit. Now here's the next cool trick. We're going to go up here and we're going to copy style. So now I can go to this next shape and I can go paste the style, and I can just keep repeating that for every letter. So that's a pretty cool trick to do with text. Okay, now we're going to go up here to our properties panel and we're going to select all these letters and we're going to group them together. And now I'll show you the next thing you can do with not only these, but you can do this with any shape. So if you hover over the corner, you'll notice as you move it around it changes to different little arrows here. So when you get out from the corner a little bit, you get these little double pointed curve icons here. When you see that, you can now drag and rotate it any way you like. And now I was talking a little while ago about when you're dealing with circles. So if we take this one and let's say we shrink it down into a little bit of an ellipse, and then we can do the same thing with that. So this is a very powerful tool. So let's get rid of that and get rid of that. We'll make a new layer to play with. Now the nice thing about these layers, actually let me just turn these back on for a second so I can show you something real quick. Let's say I wanted to move that text so that it's in behind these boxes. Well, I can just actually take that layer and I can drag it down, and you see that little blue line that's moving in between them. Once it's underneath, that's where it's going to go, and now it's in behind. Now I'm just going to undo a couple things there. So I wanted to show you something that I kind of forgotten about and did by accident here. So you know how we group this. So now I'm just going to turn that off. So now if you actually come in here and you double click, see how it kind of deselected the rest, and now this is by itself again. So I kind of bypassed the grouping. These are some odd little quirks of the program that you'll have to get used to. and they can be powerful, but they can also cause you some issues. So if that ever happens, you just have to deselect and then select once more, give a little pause. Okay, so there's just a couple other things I want to show you here. So let's get rid of this stuff. We'll go back to that new layer that we made. And I'm going to show you this rounded corner rectangle. So now if we go up here, this area in the top, where I showed you those little tidbits show up. So we've actually got a slider bar here where we can adjust how much corner radius we want. So if we want great big rounded corners, we could set it to say 40 point, and we can come down here and we can draw a box, and now you can see we've got those nice rounded corners. So now if we go up here and we adjust it really high and make a smaller box over here, you can see the difference in the effect. So it can be a large difference, or it can be very subtle. Turn it down to 10. Change our color. So we can get some really interesting effects with that. And once again, move to the corner and out a little bit, and you get your rotate tool. And now we're going to select this one, and if I go here and select our shear tool, and we can go up here and we can set the number of degrees we want to shear it by. So let's say we just see what it looks like. We go 25 degrees, click on shear, and now we've got a squashed rounded corner rectangle. So basically the way to learn this program is to really get in there and just play with this stuff and learn what it does and how it works. So let's get rid of that. All I did there was hit the delete key. Now we'll just quickly show you this other tool here. Now if you notice up here, once I selected the polygon tool, I can go up here and change the number of sides. Now I can either pop this list down to pick a specific number, or I can use the slider. And then now this is the one thing, it's a kind of a quirk with this program. Some of the tools, they draw from the corner down, but with this tool and a couple others, it draws from the center out. So you have to keep that in mind. I always forget, like I just did there. And we use the shift key. I didn't even notice that was an issue, because I always just use the shift key. It's faster. And our star tool, and we have the same setting parameters up here. We can change how many points we want, and we can also change the edge length. So just so you can see what the differences are, let's pop up a new layer so we got some room to work with. Make that other one disappear. Oh, let's pop. Oh yes, this one's from the center as well. So we'll pop that one in there. We'll pop a bigger one here. Now we'll change the edge length and see what that does. And see how it changes the amount of open space in the middle when we change our edge length. Let's change it down to something quite small, and we'll do another one. So it really gives you a high level of control over these multi-pointed figures. And now we'll go down to a 5 point. Well, let's pop a little color in here. Just like that. Now if we didn't want that to happen to our last one, let's just hit Control Z, or Command Z, sorry. And we just have to make sure nothing is selected when we change that color. So now if we go in here and change our color, it'll happen for the new one. And just for kicks and giggles, if you want to make triangles, you just make it a 3-pointed star, like so. Alright, now the other tool that I really want to show you here is the zoom tool. So if you have an area where you're really having trouble getting stuff lined up, or you need to put stuff really close to each other, you can just come in here, when you've got that little plus sign, draw a box around the area you want to deal with, and it expands it up much larger. Now a quick keyboard shortcut you're really going to want to remember is Command 0, because that'll bring you back to your entire canvas fitting in your work window, like that. Now I want to show you one other thing here before we end the tutorial. I'm going to show you a couple things in layers. So if we go up to that layer, and you saw where I clicked on the little arrow and then pop down the individual shapes. So rather than having to pick the shapes individually out here in the work area and go up here to our properties tool panel, we can actually just get rid of that entirely. And with this list pop down under the layers, now I can select the objects individually from this list, and I can go in here and change the order of them just by dragging them. So if I want that triangle to be underneath that star, I can just grab it and pull it down there, and just like that, it's done. So this gives you a lot of flexibility, and you can actually pop open other layers, and you can take and you can pull a shape from one layer and stick it into another layer entirely, which is very handy. So you definitely want to learn to play with your layers. Now the other thing you can do is when you're done with an image, and let's say you want to bring it into a whole new graphic that you're going to work on, you can merge all your layers together so that it's easier to deal with. But you can actually, if you want to select multiple layers, either to work on everything or groups of things at once, you can hold your command key down and click on the different layers and select multiple ones, or you can even select them all and then right click, and you can copy all of your layers. And then if we go in and we start a new graphic, then we can go over here to the layer panel, we can right click, and we can go paste layers. And of course you can copy and paste as many or as few layers as you want. Very handy tool to use. Alright folks, that's it for this tutorial. Keep an eye out for the next one, where we're going to pick a couple areas and go in depth and really go take you down the rabbit hole. So if you like our content, please click that like button. If you want to see more of it, please subscribe. And if you want to be notified when new videos come out, make sure you click that notification bell.